I mean, you're absolutely right about like coming together. He and I, like Paul and I definitely have a different story. You know, like he'll say that he made a move on me. I do not recall that move at all. Never.
Memorable.
Yeah. But I do remember it was like the spring of our first year. And it was our break, just, like the last night going on spring break. And, as you know, you're all on top of each other in drama school. And there's no such thing as personal space. And I think I was sitting on his lap at one point in time. And there was just something where I was just like, oh, I really fancy him. Oh my goodness. What am I going to do? And me being me, I think I went home and like talked to a roommate or something and then was like, I'm going to call him. I'm going to tell him. And my roommate was like, no, don't do it. And I did. And I scared the bejesus out of you.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
Doing creative work can be kind of lonely, and that's why we built the Unmistakable Listener Tribe. The tribe is a community for professionals to connect and support each other. Everything is designed to help you grow your business and share what's working and what isn't. And that's true whether you're a business owner or an artist. You'll get access to feedback, live conversations with guests, and so much more. By joining the tribe, you become part of a community of creators who all support each other, and it's completely free. Hopefully I'll see you there. Visit unmistakablecreative.com/tribe to join. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/tribe. Paul and Anna, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you here. So I found out about your work because you wrote in, and when I found out that you guys do a ton of work in theater, and particularly in improv, I knew I wanted to talk to you because I just felt that in improv, there's so many lessons that we can learn for communication, not just in life, but also in performance and writing and in all sorts of creative work. But as you know from having other show, we're not going to start there. I would start by asking you, what did both of your parents do for a living? How did that end up impacting the choices that you've both ended up making with your life and work? And what was the advice they gave you about making your way in the world?
Well, yeah, my folks, basically they met working in a bank. And as very young people, and they stayed in the bank their whole careers. And so theirs was kind of, in many ways, the opposite of what I ended up doing, And it's funny because I think that they're both quite really, really creative people, actually. Like my dad, now that he's retired, has become this big part of a ukulele group that's even still going online at the moment and stuff. But they, I think, went a very secure kind of route. But I think for me that I tried a little bit of that. I think I initially, I went to, my undergraduate was law, and I thought, I think I've probably seen too many John Grisham movies at the time. I had that idea of what lawyers are like. But yeah, it was. I think it was that courtroom drama that attracted me to it. But actually, that spark was always going to kind of affect me, and so I ended up. I had done a play in my last year of high school, and then started doing some more in university. But it's funny that actually, I think one of the huge things for me with my parents is how they always kind of had a kind of a gang around them of their kind of friends and people they took care of and stuff. And so even as I started to enter kind of the idea of maybe acting and theater and things like that, I think always a big part of it's been having the right gang around you of people and creating a gang who are excited to, bring a show together or bring a project together. And so I've never been as excited about the idea of just being solo out in the world trying to make it happen, I think. And I think that's partially, I think that's a big thing that it gave to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, my dad is a preacher by trade. And my mother would be an administrator. So my dad is very creative. He had a Christian rock band when I was growing up. And so being, 5 or 7 or 10 or 11, my goal was, of course, to make it into the band. He would write sketches and everything like that. So that definitely was a part, creative expression was something that I saw from a very young age. And I would go on stage even when I was like 5 or 6 to sing solos or whatever. It was always kind of a part of me and what I did. And then, but I think that similar to what Paul was saying is that, because my dad at one point in time had a home church, so we always had this like people gathering and people, taken together and kind of building community. And that is something that I've always loved, and even was echoed in some of my theater experiences and university and that kind of thing. And I think that's really influenced me and influenced my life. I mean, my mother would definitely have been of the, wanting me to get a degree, wanting me to, be safe and taken care of. And the creativity kind of was scary, and she didn't quite fully trust that it would take care of me. Just because it was kind of out of her experience, coming from, a family where her dad was like, bus driver, and they worked for the school, and her mom, taught and was a secretary, that kind of thing. So,
yeah. So Anna, this is a question for you. With a father who was a preacher, did you have a very sort of strict, Puritan religious upbringing, or did you have sort of the freedom that I wouldn't think you'd have with somebody who's a father who's a preacher? What was that like?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because it was kind of an odd mix, right? because yes, he was a preacher, so there was definitely some moral and strict kind of codes in that respect, but he was also like a child of the 70s, came out, he did some wild things at that time. So he was kind of from a movement called like the Jesus people. So they would, have alcohol and stuff like that, just try not to have it to excess, that kind of thing. So looking back, I think I internalized it as pretty strict. Just because, as a kid, when you're like hearing all of these do not, and I have to be good, and you internalize it differently. I think that now as an adult looking back, I would see. Yeah. So yes and no.
So Paul, did you grow up in Ireland?
I did. Yeah. Dublin born.
All right. So I wonder, when it comes to narratives about careers, about success, and particularly about creative careers, what is predominant in the culture in Ireland? Because I know you've probably heard me say on the show before, as an Indian immigrant, much like both of your parents, security was definitely a high priority for my parents. But I understand now why, because of the context in which they were giving that advice, because they grew up in an environment where their life outcomes were binary. It was either poverty or security, nothing in between. And I wonder what that's like in Ireland, and how you find that to be different from sort of the narratives you've been exposed to from people in different parts of the world, particularly in the United States.
Yeah, no, I think that my folks are kind of fairly representative. I think most of my friends would be the same way. I think the thing with Ireland is that it's now, feels like a very first world country, but it's funny that go back 2 generations and, people had to leave the country, to have to emigrate to the States and the UK and stuff, because there just wasn't work here, and there wasn't opportunities. The economy really only started to get going in the late 20th century in many ways. Before that, it really was way behind other countries, even in Europe. And so the recent kind of tech boom and things here has changed a lot of how people look at things. But definitely coming from my parents' generation, and even a lot of my friends that I grew up with, there is definitely that urge for security is very present, I think, in Irish life. I think partially it's because for a lot of Irish people, a lot of people in Ireland, particularly of previous generations, they worked to live. They wanted a job that then would enable them to have enough money, to have their house, to have the various things they needed, and so then they could enjoy themselves the rest of their lives. Their hobbies and how they spend their evenings and their weekends and their social clubs and going away on holidays together. That was what the job was for, probably maybe for a lot of people more than, say, being their purpose or their real drive for what they did in life. I think it was very much work was in service of that. And I can see a lot of my kind of my parents' friends who then took retirement, early retirement. They're now having this second lease of life where they're getting to explore all these things that they didn't have the time and space to do when they were, working jobs, getting houses, raising families, but only probably when they're in their, late 50s, early 60s, are they getting around to that.
Yeah.
So I think but it's also an interesting thing because there's this really strong creative spirit in Irish society, really strong storytelling spirit and musical social spirit, which then kind of does get often in clash with that because you have people who, there's a real strong strand of musicians, of writers, of actors, of people in those areas. But I think there's a lot of pushback against the idea of that as a career, against doing something like that. And the belief, the belief that you can actually make a living doing something like that. Yeah, there's not a lot of role models outside of the people that you probably know famously.
Hi, I'm Elaine McCrimmon and I'm excited to launch AB InBev's new podcast, Talking on Tap. Our podcast takes you inside the world's leading brewer, tapping into our internal experts and meeting external leaders from the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, Business Fights Poverty, Accenture and Wyden and Kennedy. Just search Talking on Tap.
You're ready to get back into yoga, so you ordered the essentials, a non-slip mat, yoga blocks to keep balance, and an exercise ball. And you used your Bank of America customized cash rewards credit card, choosing to earn 3% cash back on online shopping and up to 5.25% as a preferred rewards member, which you put towards your most essential yoga gear, noise canceling headphones. Apply for yours at bankofamerica.com/more rewarding. Copyright 2021 Bank of America Corporation.
This episode of The Unmistakable Creative is brought to you by ThoughtWorks, a global technology consultancy that's hiring senior and lead developers, data engineers, infrastructure consultants, and more to join them in their roles across the United States. It's pretty clear that last year changed our working lives forever, and maybe it made you realize that you were ready for a change. At ThoughtWorks, they challenge curious minds to make a real impact, get to know them, and discover how you can make your mark in tech. At ThoughtWorks, you're free to seek the most ambitious challenges, free to change career paths, free to use technology as a tool for social change, and free to be yourself. They're looking for change makers, opportunity creators, status quo shakers, ThoughtWorkers. And if you're listening to The Unmistakable Creative, that's probably you. Learn more and apply at thoughtworks.com/careers. Again, that's thoughtworks.com/careers.
Well, I think there's definitely some grain of truth to that narrative, right? Because you're signing up for a life in which nothing is guaranteed and anything is possible, as I've said 1,000 times before. And we had William Dershowitz here who talked about sort of the death of the artist. And he said, yes, now with the internet, this opportunity to go out and do anything and make anything is available. He said, but it's also available to everybody, which changes, the entire odds of your success. So, Paul, this is one more question for you. You had this moment when you realized you didn't want to be a lawyer. And I've asked people this question in some form or another. I feel like so often people who are young don't actually recognize those moments for what they are. And it ends up being, 40, 50 years later where people are, partners at a law firm and discover that they hate their life. In fact, I don't know what it is, but I feel like of anybody I know, lawyers seem to hate their jobs more than anybody. But that's a whole aside. The question is, why don't you think we recognize that moment earlier in life? And more importantly, why don't we do anything about it? Because I can tell you, I don't think I had any interest in any of the things that I studied while I was in college. And it's only now in retrospect that I look back and see that.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount, of that we get told a little bit about how the journey of our lives are supposed to go. You get certain ideas in school and then moving into college and then into jobs about the way, the kind of direction and the graph of how our lives are supposed to go. And I think sometimes when we get these little blips of instinct or these little moments of synchronicity, or where we kind of, these little discoveries, sometimes they are very exciting, but they also don't feel like they fit on the graph that we have been pre-given. And particularly, they don't fit like in terms of career and money and those kind of ideas. And I think sometimes what we do is we explore them a bit. And as soon as we hit the first kind of like time when it kind of bites back, or it doesn't work out the way we planned, or it doesn't go well, I think then it's very easy to retreat then back into the graph that we've been set. So, I think for me, I even had that because when I did a play in my final year of school, and it went really well. It was like an amazing experience. I really thought this is something I wanted to explore more. But I was going to be doing law in college, but I would do the drama society and all that. But when I went to the drama society in college, that didn't really work out that well. I kind of got to end up in getting it clashing with a couple of people there, and it didn't really work out. And I ended up dropping out of that. And it actually took me a couple of years after that of kind of wandering a bit in terms of creatively, before I came back to acting and came back to theatre. And that was, I think, just the urge was so strong that, and it's funny that I think other people could see it in me, I used to have, the friends I was with, that I made in when I was in college studying law. I remember walking back from campus, from the main campus towards where the law school was one day. And one of the guys, John, turned to me at one point. We were having a conversation. I was talking passionately about the arts. And he was kind of going, why are you in law? You should be studying arts. And I just kind of blew him off at the time, going, yeah, I have to talk about these things. But I think sometimes other people see it more than we do.
Yeah. So I was just curious, do you guys have kids?
We do not.
Okay. Well, the reason I was asking is because I always wonder, what kinds of advice creative people would give to parents, especially when they have kids, because I think there's this sort of odd paradox of artists who basically will tell their kids never to become artists, and then others who want their kids to do nothing more. Like my friend Mars Dorian, he told me that his mother once said, please, son, whatever you do, don't become some sort of corporate person. I hope you become an artist. I was like, no parent tells their kid that. Yeah, I guess, having pursued both of these careers, and we'll kind of get into the trajectory of how you guys got here, what advice would you give to parents who are listening who see these sort of creative tendencies and creative impulses in their kids? Because I think for the most part, as a child, I was told that anything creative, I was a musician, all these things were nice hobbies, but they were definitely not things that I would ever make a career out of.
Yeah, I think, for me, I would say, let them explore it. That you don't know where anything might lead, and it certainly can't hurt, no matter what they do in life. It can't hurt to let them have a dream, let them play around and explore different avenues and find their voice. Like, if they're meant to be a lawyer, they'll find that, if they have to be an actor first, well, hey, but I think my advice would be to try not to let your fear inhibit the possibilities that your child has, like really allowing them to explore, which is so easy for me to say because I don't have any children.
Yeah, I think like most life advice, everything is easier said than done.
Yeah. I mean, I have to give that to myself, because I still have so many limiting beliefs that oftentimes when I look back at my career, if I haven't been satisfied or whatnot, oftentimes it's myself. I'm the one who, some story I heard when I was younger, or, and that's the thing, is it can be a little thing, right? It's just like this. It's just, sometimes it's just seems so fragile, right? That creativity spark, because you can have one person that says something and kind of just cuts you off from, oh, this is bad. Oh, this isn't right. Oh, I'm doing this wrong. And all of a sudden that door is shut. So, and you just don't know what's behind that door, because so just trying to keep the doors open, I think, be spoiled for choice and keep exploring, because as I said, like creativity won't, and you mentioned this even in the intro, it can't hurt. No matter what you do in life, it will only enhance your life.
Yeah. Speaking of which, what has been the trajectory of both your careers that led to you doing this work, and how in the world did you guys end up meeting?
We met in drama school. I came here. So I did trajectory. As I said, I started singing on the stage when I was 5 or 6. And then, did all the school plays that I could, all the way up through high school. And then in college, I studied theater and criminal justice. And that took me to a internship in the UK doing prison theater and prison and probation, the TIP Centre in Manchester. And then I went back and finished my degree, and then I wanted to do something physical. So I taught ballroom dance for a year with Arthur Murray. And then I was really missing theater. So I was applying to grad schools, and there was a school in Ireland that I applied to, and eventually I got an offer there. So I came here and did a 2-year kind of conservatory type program. And that's where Paul and I met. And and then from there it was whatever and however to earn a living and to keep creative. I feel like my path has definitely been a little bit of a seesaw between safety and trusting that the creative life can provide. I ended up, I taught drama in high school for a year in the States at a private high school. And then in New York, I think I probably had a job in any and every kind of field that you could think of, whether part-time or full-time, and always auditioning and creating our own work. That was something that right when we got out of drama school, when we didn't get roles right away, we were like, we got to create something. So we started, our theater company about the year after we graduated.
Yeah. 1 year after.
Yeah, 1 year out. So, so the journey has been one of learning constantly, and growing and retreating and opening up again. And, I have been trying to follow the love. Like when we moved back here, I really wanted to trust, being able to do more of what I love, and really trust that can sustain us. So there's been a practice of that too.
So we'll get into all that. But so this is going to be weird, but Paul, I want to ask you the same question about how you guys met, because I feel like if you ask a couple how they met and they're telling the story to two different people, they'll tell a different version of the story. So I want to hear your version of how you guys met.
It's funny. Actually, I was thinking, one thing you didn't really mention is that, so in terms of like, I kind of had the opposite journey to Anna in ways that I didn't have really any access to performance or theater really, or anything like that when I was growing up. I wasn't a drama class kid. It was only literally this one teacher in school who dragged me into this play, ended up doing, and it was like, I fell in love with the theater there. But basically, after I came out of college and then I ended up taking a part-time acting class. And that ended up being massive for me. I was working this, this well-paying corporate job for like an oil company, but very quickly the 4 hours a week I was spending doing this acting class, I liked an awful lot more than the 40 hours a week I was working in this other job. And so by the end of it, it was going well enough that I felt like I could try for full-time drama school at the end of it. And I applied and got in, and which I was just so excited by and delighted by, and felt very naive going in the first day. But the very first day, there was this, compared to my naive, not knowing what anything was going on, there was this extremely confident American girl who was there, and we got paired together on the very first exercise that we ever had to do.
Was the first exercise? I think it was in the afternoon.
Maybe the afternoon. That's how I remember it. But where you had to tell the other person about where you kind of a little bit about your story, and then they would listen, and later on they would kind of tell your story to the class. So instead of me telling my story to the class, Anna would tell mine to the class.
I couldn't understand a word that he said.
Well, it's I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's Robin Williams does this sketch in his Live on Broadway show about Scottish people and how they invented golf. And he talks about how you can't understand a word they're saying. And it's the funniest sketch I've ever seen. But yeah, I could see why you might say that, Hannah.
Yeah, my accent.
Even though I know you're Irish, Paul. I know you're not Scottish. Just so we're.
So we met on the first day. But I think it's funny. Like, we came from such different backgrounds, but during the course of our 2 years of drama school, probably before we were going to be a couple, we were great friends and we were very simpatico about, about what theater could be and what acting could be, and very much more about like what the results it could give for like the experience audiences could have. I think we were a little bit more about that than going, oh, I want to be a star and this or that. I think we've a lot of late night, Friday night, long sessions in the pub, kind of just talking about art and theater and story and character. And that's kind of how it really started for us before we even kind of then became a couple kind of like later in drama school.
Yeah. So were you guys, outside of this sort of first exercise, were you in roles together during this time?
Yeah. So, I mean, for the most part, we weren't paired together, but we were and just so you know, he was against all of my rules. Like, I was not going to date an actor, definitely not an actor in my class. No. And definitely not someone younger than me. So like all my rules were broken.
Yeah.
But we did a comedy scene, didn't we? Because like I remember wearing a hugely padded bra or something because I was playing some sort of
you're playing like a French maid. A
French maid, very stereotypical, because it was a over the top kind of comedy. And so this like drama school being drama school, like the other people in the class just like, they knew at this stage that we were a couple, and they just found it hilarious that I had to do this like, oh, hello, kind of role.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked that is because my roommate was a theater major in college, and he was telling me that when he was in sort of a romantic role with somebody else, it was really, it was hard to sort of have this distinction between whatever you're feeling when you're on stage performing versus how you feel about each other in reality when you're not on stage performing. And it's easy to mix up the two because you're putting so much emotion into these performances. And so I wonder, one, how did you guys know? Like, how did you guys know you were sort of meant for each other? Which I realize is, like a question that millions of books have been written about. And as my listeners like to joke, every question and every guest is a reflection of a problem I'm trying to solve in my life.
I love it. Well, to be honest, we were really good friends, and where you I mean, you're absolutely right about like coming together. He and I, like Paul and I, definitely have a different story. Like he'll say that he made a move on me. I do not recall that move at all. Never.
Memorable.
Yeah. But I do remember it was like the spring of our first year. And it was our break, just, like the last night going on spring break. And, as you know, you're all on top of each other in drama school. And there's no such thing as personal space. And I think I was sitting on his lap at one point in time. And there was just something where I was just like, oh, I really fancy him. Oh my goodness. What am I going to do? And me being me, I think I went home and like talked to a roommate or something, and then was like, I'm going to call him. I'm going to tell him. And my roommate was like, no, don't do it. And I did, and I scared the bejesus out of you.
All right, so Paul, tell me your reaction to this experience, like, and what was the move that, Anna says you didn't make?
I think looking back, it was really terrible. I think I was something about, I don't know, like offering to rub our shoulders in the pub or something. It was just terrible. I look back at it with squeamishness. But because I remember of course, this is like, it's going to go back in history a little bit here, but I think it was just before we had like cell phones, really. I remember our like our kind of towards the last couple of months in drama school, everyone got cell phones because you had to have them for like
for agents to call you.
Yeah, but I remember that this would have been about a year before that, and Anna called me on my home phone, and I remember basically they called me up and said, "Yeah, do you want to go? I think we should." I think it was very kind of, it wasn't like happy-go-lucky. It was very direct. It was like, I think we need to go and get coffee and talk about this and work this out. I remember like my brother like coming into the room and being like, "Who are you talking to?" And agreeing to go. And I remember it was like, it wasn't really almost. It's hard to know what was our first date, because then we went on this date where we had coffee, but we almost like, it wasn't like a romantic, cozy candlelit coffee. It was like a discussion about, should we go out? Should we not go out? And at the end,
it was a strategy session.
And at the end, we agreed we would give it a go and see how it worked out.
That's hilarious. So you had a strategy session to figure out whether you should date.
Yeah. Now, in fairness, we had gone on super romantic dates before then as a non-couple. Like we'd gone to see like super romantic movies and like dinner and coffee and like, but it was just, we were just friends at that point in time.
Wow.
But yeah, as soon as our first proper date was a discussion.
Yeah, and then you
Well, it's funny because when I think about theater, particularly like my friends who are in high school theater, I think to myself, I'm like, if I wanted to do a lot of drugs and get laid, I probably should have joined the theater, not the band. Seems like they had a lot more interesting lives than, band geeks did. So that, I think, makes a perfect segue to talking about this whole idea of theater, particularly in the face of sort of where we're at today. So one thing I want to understand is looking at how you actually work at your craft, like what goes into the creative process of putting together a production? How do you get good at what you do as an actor, like beyond sort of what we see? Because I think that for people like us, we see the final performance, right? You see the movie. You don't see the hundreds of hours on set. You don't see the thousands of takes. We don't see the rehearsals where people forget their lines. So what actually goes into this?
Wow, that's a great question. I could answer it in so many different ways. I think that my first instinct is play. At least for us, that's what I think. As if we look at our theater company, what we've discovered, and for us in rehearsals and everything like that, we want to create as safe a place as possible that the artists can come, because everyone has their own approach and their own way of doing things, so that it's kind of, we just create a place where all these different ingredients can come and mix and play, and you need a director who can allow everyone to come, but also knows when to make decisions. And yeah, because I do think that each actor has their own approach, their own way, and so we think it's really important to respect all of those different approaches. And I think the journey of an actor is often you're finding your voice, you're finding the way that you work. Like, I don't know if one ever arrives there. Yeah, I mean, you keep learning. And I think the way is doing it.
Yeah.
But for picking plays, we got to love it.
Yeah. I think it's funny because I think at one point as an actor, especially in my late 20s, and thought I was doing a lot of studying of acting. I'm studying with the great teachers and taking classes. When we moved to New York for a while, I was really trying to learn. I thought I could work it out. I thought I could work out the system for how to work on a script, to how to do the preparation. Taking elements from all sorts of different places, from Stanislavski, from David Mamet, from different books I read. And I thought at one point I could work it out, logically work out how to do it. Until I realized after a while that it wasn't, that it's all you can do is you build a toolbox of different ways of approaching the work in terms of learning about your movement, learning about your voice, learning about interpreting a script, learning about being with an audience and the ebb and flow of all that. And that you just build up, start putting tools into a box that then you can use. Because you look at someone like Al Pacino talks about this, is that when he starts a project, every new project he starts as if he knows nothing. Because anytime you try and bring the exact same methodology to as you brought to the last one, you're dead. It just doesn't work. And I think that's both the exciting and the really frustrating thing about being an actor is every time you work on a new project, you kind of have to just approach it afresh. You do come with more tools to work with. You do come from experience. You come with skills. But at the end of the day, you have to come at it from a fresh perspective. And that, I think, comes back to what Anna's saying, is that you need to have a playful environment to work in so that you can take chances and try things and give things a go. And if they fall flat on their face, like you say, in rehearsals where no one else sees them, where it's only the creative people working on it, then it's fine. It's fine for that to fail and not to go right, because it's a playful environment where then you find the gold and what does work on this particular project.
We're all shopping for essentials online these days, and now you can get rewarded for it. With a Bank of America customized cash rewards credit card, you can choose to earn 3% cash back on online shopping. The essentials have never felt more rewarding. Visit bankofamerica.com/more rewarding to apply now. Copyright 2021 Bank of America Corporation.
So one thing we've talked a lot about at Unmistakable Creative is how environment influences our behavior. And if you're like me, you might walk into some of those fancy department stores or see someone's Pinterest board and be filled with envy and think, I could never make my place look like that. Well, with Redecor, you can finally take control and unleash your creativity to design a space that you love. Before you start painting your bedroom or bathroom or living room some sort of color because you think it might look cool, you can actually test it out with Redecor. And without having to spend a fortune or buying tools and accidentally knocking down the walls in your home when you're just trying to hang a picture frame, you can actually test things out. Redecor is the perfect fusion between home design and mobile gaming, and with this interactive redecorating game, you become the designer. It's your style, your rules, and it sharpens your decorating skills, helps you to relax, and it unleashes your creativity. So why not download Redecor while you're listening to the podcast? It's completely free and available on both the Apple App Store and Google Play. Download Redecor now and become an interior designer today, even if it's just for fun.
Yeah, hence the reason all the high school kids who are having sex and doing drugs are in theater.
That's always been, I think, a good advertisement. For sure.
Yeah. So, encourage your kids to join the theater if you want them to get laid in high school, basically, is the lesson.
Yeah, we might get that put on T-shirts, maybe.
So what drew you in particular to theater as opposed to movies? And just because I think that there's something very different about sort of seeing live theater and live performance than there is about watching something take place on a screen.
Yeah. Well, now I love acting for screen too. That is something as an actor I quite enjoy. But theater is like my home base. It's like kind of, I guess, like my own church, my own spiritual home. Because it's so live. It's so present. I love the audience. I love feeling that energy, that wholeness, that all of us are together. I feel like as a performer, you have a responsibility, as an actor to the audience. But I just love holding that energy for them, holding that space for them, and for the story that we're giving, the story we're sharing. I love working with actors, and you love and hate the whole process of okay, it's week 3 of rehearsals. Everyone's going to get sick and everyone's going to be annoyed. Nothing's going to feel right. It's all going to be awkward and not look right, and oh my gosh, this is never going to work. And then just praying for some miracle that it'll all come together. But it all, it's but it happens every time, and it happens, yeah. So why I think theater is it for me is, it's the whole, every part of my being, is necessary, including my spiritual being that is the oneness, that connects everyone. I think it's just whole body.
Yeah. So, no, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just going to say, I think just adding to what Anna was saying, I think partly for an actor, and I think this is I see this with a lot of our colleagues and things, is one of the things that as from the artist's point of view is, as an actor in the theater, it kind of becomes your responsibility. It becomes your choices. It's your job on the night to make it work for an audience. It's so much. I love working in, as Anna says, I'm working in TV and film and things like that. And there you're giving, you give the director you give him as realistic as possible, and you give him as many options as possible. So later when he and the editor get together and they cut it up, they can make their decisions about how the story is going to be told best. But at the end of the day, I'm not in that room. I don't get to tell them. Maybe Tom Cruise does, but I don't get to tell them which take they should use or what they should do. I'm an important cog in a big machine of like really cool people, of camera people and all this kind of stuff. But in the theater, at the end of the day, there's a play and there's a stage and there's actors and, we're supported, with the design, the lights and everything. But at the end of the day, each night at 8:00 or whatever it is, as an actor, you have to get up on that stage, deliver that performance, deliver that line to that audience on that night. And it's your responsibility. And if it doesn't work, it's basically my fault. You know what I mean? It might be our fault as a unit, but it's also then, it's my sort of sense of fulfillment when you get an audience that are so delighted by it. They're having a great time and then they're buzzing afterwards in the lobby and stuff. That, I guess it's that feeling as an artist. It's that you get that fulfillment because, it's on your shoulders.
Yeah. Well, so I think that this makes a perfect segue to talking about people who themselves are not actors like myself. What are the sort of benefits of taking an acting class, taking an improv class? How do we apply that to those concepts to our creative work? Whether it's, as a writer, me as a podcaster, as I told you, my first motivation to join an improv class was I thought it would be a great place to meet girls. But then I realized, wait a minute, I could actually go there and potentially improve myself as an interviewer as well, which is, it's what I think the economists call that a positive externality. But when we're looking at how we apply this to our lives, whether it's in conversation with, a friend, family member, whatever it is, how do we do that? Like, what can we learn from this that impacts other areas of our lives?
Well, I think the thing is, for someone like taking some sort of theater related class, or it's an acting class or an improv class or something like that, I think what you're doing is you're putting yourself in an environment where you get to play and get to try things. You get to look silly, and get used to that idea and realize it's not the worst thing in the world, and actually you bounce back and things. You get used to being in front of an audience, whether that's like in class, it's funny, doing a scene even in front of like 8 or 10 people, or getting up and improvising in front of 8 or 10 people. There's still a frisson of intensity to that moment. There's still a bit of nerves and something to that. So what you're doing is you're building your capacity to be in awkward situations, because you've kind of you have to try them in a safe place. It's like rehearsals. You get to practice things and try them out on your feet, try out these situations. So you get used to it. You sort of break through things like embarrassment. You get used to like what it's like to be in front of an audience and that kind of thing. Get used to the idea of telling a story. And I think what that does is on a like, even before you get into the specifics of like, say, business training or something like that, you're just talking about an improv class or some sort of acting class. What you're doing is it's going to build your confidence and your sense of creativity going into those situations back in your real life, because you get to try it in not real life. You get to try much more dramatic or funny or silly situations than you would have in real life. So it's funny then when you go back to real life to deal with them, they're not such a big deal, And I think that's one of the things about, practicing acting and improv kind of gives you.
And I'd say too, and I know you've said this before on the podcast, Srini, that I do think for creatives, trying out a different avenue of creativity always will enhance your work. Just like sometimes I am not like an artiste by any means, but like I'll play with decoupage or with watercolor, because being in the creative space is, it's the same space kind of to a certain extent, right? You're just accessing it from a different door or whatever. And so I think for for creatives, especially if you're, not necessarily a creative that is a social creative. It can really give you an opportunity to kind of sneak in through a different door and access creativity in a different way and play. And that to me just can only enhance your own work. You always learn, right? Like you always learn more about your creativity and can approach your own work then in a different way when you expose yourself to another way of working.
Oh yeah, I mean, I took Ken Burns' documentary filmmaking class, and it was one of the first times I'd done a project just for fun that had absolutely nothing to do with my work. Fantastic. And now I'm actually doing a full blown project on masterclass where I'm taking one masterclass every month, and basically I'm going to do a project on that masterclass. So I'm doing Annie Leibowitz's portrait class right now and driving my roommates crazy by shooting pictures of them every moment. So I want to move this towards an example that has nothing to do with creativity and that might be somewhat ridiculous, but I thought it would actually be a good question to ask. So let's say I want to take these concepts to something that I deal with on a regular basis, and probably some people do, an argument with my mother or a conversation with my mother in which I run the risk of pissing her off, which is pretty much every conversation I have. So let's say I wanted to take these concepts and leverage this idea of play in conversation when it's a conversation where there's potentially conflict or argument.
Yeah. Well, one of the huge proponents in acting and theater and improv is listening. And I think that oftentimes in arguments, we stop listening. We can only hear our point of view. So I think that that's a huge tool, is actually to get to practice listening. And then, and so then in an argument, you can stop yourself and really try to listen and really hear what's going on beneath, because there's usually more to it. Like we're arguing on the surface, right? But there's usually things that are unsaid beneath, which we call subtext.
Yeah. Well, so talk to me about this whole idea of yes and. I mean, I know that this is one of the sort of common phrases that comes from the world of improv, and it's kind of building on things. So I think a good example is creative collaboration. So let's say that, a partner and I are working on building something or working on something like an online course, which is something we're building on right now. And in a meeting, we're adding. And so there's a sort of distinction I think that I've come across in anything I've read about improv where they make this, distinction between yes and but. Can you guys talk about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the key thing about yes and is just that it's in kind of an improv type situation. People have a tendency to want to like take control and block and kind of they want to try and guide it a certain way. They start to see into the future of how they think it's going to go, and they start to wrench it and try and drag it in that direction. So, you have an improv scene where I'm saying, I'm walking in and I'm saying, oh, yeah, I've got my cat with me. And they go, no, you don't. That's your dog, which might sound funny in the moment, but actually straight away, what it's doing is creating a situation where you're kind of blocking possibilities.
And the scene doesn't have anywhere to go then.
Whereas the yes and thing is you're always building on top of things. You know what I mean? And so I think it's about the additional possibilities. And I think it's building richness. Because I think you can, and you talked about the yes, but I think that's what you do is you take that and you turn it a slightly different way. But you don't just sort of push back against the whole idea. You don't just kind of take the other person's idea. They're a little, if it was a bit of paper, you don't just crumple it up in a ball and fling it away and start again. It's taking it and just going, okay, we're going to run with carry the momentum you're going. We're just going to carry it in this slightly different direction, but I'm not going to stop your car moving. We're just going to point it, a little bit another direction. And it's this idea of you don't want to get shot down with the ideas that you're bringing into a creative space, because it's often the one feels the silliest and the most, that's foolish. That is not going to work. But sometimes if you give it a little chance to breathe, it's actually the one that goes, oh, wait a second. I hadn't really thought it could be that. Like in a scene, if we're working on something, sometimes asking the actor to do the exact opposite of what it looks like they're doing. We were just in a class last night where we asked an actor had a moment in a scene where he discovers his wife is pregnant, and he says to her, "Oh, that's you are. My God, I have to go out and tell everyone." And we just to try something, we asked him to just do it like he was not happy about that circumstance, and it suddenly changed the whole meaning of that moment. But actually, it wasn't totally wrong. There was something in that, and I think sometimes we block little threads of possibilities for what we think is the obvious answer.
Yeah. And the safest and the most comfortable or the right answer, which, you know, can kill anything. Trying to be right, you know? And I mean, the yes and, it's such a, when it's really done in the spirit of it, of yes and, it is such a joy. Because what is more, you know, part of being creative, right, is that you want someone to say, yeah, that's a good idea. Well done, you know, like, well done. And so it almost like continues to keep inspiring itself and inspiring. And then you're collaborating, right? Because then you're like, oh, I'm going to tickle them with this. I have you. Here's your idea, and I'm going to tickle you with this thing. And so it becomes less about yourself and about being right and about looking good, and it's about kind of like pleasing each other and play.
Yeah, but it's kind of like, it's not so much that you've pre-decided your idea for things, but you hear their idea and you decide to run with that.
Yeah,
that's probably key to it.
Well, I think it's interesting that you described, you know, use the phrase thread of possibility, because it almost brings us full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning when people are thinking about what to do with their life, and how, in my mind, the connection I made, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this could be a strategy that we could use to basically make choices in our life as well. So you're in this sort of phase of discovery when you're in college or trying to figure out what you want to do. So I guess the question then is, you know, if we were to look at this, not that you want to improvise every life plan that you have, but, you know, to keep yourself open to threads of possibility when you're planning life, how could you use this for that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely. Because I do think that that's sorry, I'm just processing it in my head, but I think that if I had, goodness gracious, you know, even if you think too about, we were talking about parents at the beginning too. If you think if your parents, you know, if you came to your parent with like, oh, you know, I think I'm going to, like, when I told my mom I was going to be an actor, if she had responded, yes. And, you know, and what are you going to, you know, and what are you going to do? Or not, what are you going to do? That's like blocking it, but like, and yes. And here's, you know, my support, and, you know, here's a costume, and go thee to the corner. But I think that, the yes, whenever you feel yourself blocking yourself, if you can find the yes and, if you can find a way to ask yourself, how, you know, where's the wonder? Where's the possibility in here? Where's the joy? You know, where's the thread of possibility?
Yeah, I think, and it's sometimes I think back in my own life, I think it's the moments, I think, when I felt that strange combination of both excitement and also a bit of fear. That moment where you kind of go, something pops up, you go, I might like to try that, but it sounds a bit scary. So I kind of have to, you know, put my courage in place and kind of put a bit of fire in my chest and go, okay, I'm going to go do it, and probably walk into that room, wherever it is. There's probably some part of me that's sweating and is not sure this is going to work out, and maybe has a couple of times that I want to turn back. But those are the ones then when I come through those that usually are the things that turn out the best. And they often come out of left field. You know, sometimes it's just something you're just past, there's a moment just comes to you. Someone throws something at you, or you see a poster for something, or just this whim, like you're talking about, Srini, just talking about, an improv class. It's something that kind of pops into your head. Sometimes, and rather than just like letting that just pass you by, if it gives you that little frizz on of like, that might be uncomfortable for me, but it might be really fun. I think that being in that place, those are the threads that are worth running after.
Yeah. Yeah. You know? It's like those moments of inspiration or some, you know, something. That's where you want to say, yes, I see you, and I'm going to follow through. You know, yes, I see you, and I am going to take that class. Because even if it doesn't end up, you know, changing your life or whatever, it actually builds up your confidence in your own creativity and in your own voice, right? Because you're saying, yes, I see that spark. I see what's inspiring you, and we're going to follow that and see where it takes us.
Well, speaking of where it takes you during this entire time, I can't imagine it's all been smooth sailing, because I don't know any artist whose career has been nothing but smooth sailing. Have there been moments where you've had these sort of all of lost moments where you wondered, whether you should quit? And how did you get past them?
Yes, most definitely. I have definitely been curled up in a ball, bawling, saying, why am I doing that? Definitely.
Yeah, no, I think there's absolutely. I think particularly in being an actor and stuff, like being an actor when we lived in New York for a number of years, like chasing the kind of acting dream, wanted to learn more about it, and you're working other jobs. And I can remember a time when I'd been working this job and for a couple of years, kind of part-time, to kind of, while I was doing my classes, getting my photographs taken, all that stuff. And there was a chance to take a kind of a redundancy package, because it was around 2008. So they were trying to shrink down the business. And so I was like, oh my God, I can get I think it was 4, 5, 6 months pay, and I can just be an actor full time in New York City. This is exactly what I need. And so I took it and went out with like a big plan, and, got new photos and approached all the casting directors and went to every audition, and I got a few things. But I suddenly came to the end of that, I think maybe 5 or 6 month period. And I remember there was a moment when just that money was starting to run out, and I needed to start thinking about earning again. And it wasn't really that easy to get another job, especially like the kind of comfortable one that I had. And I can remember one day when Anna at the time was working in a gym as a manager there, and I needed to take a day's work as a cleaner in the gym. And there was nothing wrong with that work, but I remember coming home that night and just being in the bathroom of our apartment and sliding down the wall in tears. Not because I felt I was above that work, but because I suddenly felt like I had all these opportunities, and this is how I ended up. And I'd taken my shot that I thought I had of being an actor, and it hadn't worked out. And, it felt like a really dark place. But then I ended up kind of coming out of that and seeing where the next job I ended up getting. And it's funny that I think pretty much the next job I got a couple of months later, after doing a few different bits and pieces, was actually working for a theater company in New York. And it was funny, it was only by taking that big leap, I would say probably not quite failing, but probably not getting as much out of it as I needed to, that then ended up leading me to another course, where I ended up then working for this theater company in New York and learning a huge amount about producing as well as being an actor. And that's something that's been a huge experience for me going forward. But definitely, I'm telling you, that day, that night, in that evening in the bathroom, I just I felt like hell that night.
Wow. Well, this has been amazing, as I thought it would be. I mean, you guys have been phenomenal. So I want to finish with my final question, which I know you've heard me ask. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
I think, and I knew you were going to ask, I was like, I'm going to have to prepare. I have to have something. Which is
ironic considering what we've been talking about.
I know. But you'll be happy that I don't have anything prepared in the end, even though I thought I should. But to me, it's your voice. I think if we honor our voice and we honor that journey and we pull at those threads and the possibility and find them, that's what makes you unmistakable. That's what's distinct. And that's where you really find you and your voice and what you have to offer.
Yeah, I think it would be fairly similar to that. I think it's responding to your own instincts. And I think this is a lesson I keep learning all the time about my own acting performances and things, because sometimes I start to think about the way I should do things and the way other people do things. But always the things that work out the best are where it comes from my own creative instincts, my responses to the circumstances. And I think isn't what I see in other people. It's what's most unmistakable about it is when it's like, I go, oh, that's their choice.
Yeah.
That's their instinct. Only they could do it that way.
Yeah.
And that's when they're following their own creative instinct, even when maybe in many ways It's not the logical, it's not the way it should be done, but it's the way they felt they had to do it.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and your wisdom and your insights with our listeners. Where can people find out more about you guys, your work, and everything that you're up to? Yeah,
they can go to our website. It's aboutfacetheatre.ie. That's theatre spelled with an R-E on the end. Aboutfacetheatre.ie. That's the Irish website. Whatever that anything's called.
Yep, and we're also on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook. So, so you can find us on all of those places.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're glad to hear from people.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.
Can one person break barriers for everyone? I'm Alicia Burke, host of That Made All the Difference, a Bank of America podcast featuring people who are advancing equality. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. What would you like the power to do?